5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We are joined again today by our friend, Rudy Rivera of the Hand Craft, a biomechanics and mixed martial arts sort of focused approach to finding a way that you train in a way that really works for you. We had a great interview with him a little while back, so go listen to the first episode that we did with Rudy. I loved that. You can get more of a sense of his training philosophy. Today, we are having another MMA, boxing, striking, biomechanic focused episode where we're going to kind of talk about a variety of different topics in terms of how you can optimize your biomechanics for striking, for just having, if you have a movement practice that is inclusive of the martial arts. We're going to kind of dive into some of the nuances and practices that we can do. I always kind of take a bit of a backseat on these episodes because I am a total noob in these. Will has been boxing for quite some time. Rudy does coach people in martial arts and martial arts movement practices. I shadow box when I'm on the phone. And that's the, and we'll sometimes bring out the pads when he comes to visit me in Canmore. That's the extent of my martial practice right now. And, I'll sometimes do some high kicks and some Taekwondo stuff that I saw Joe Rogan doing. But I love learning about it, and I love exploring it. So, the questions that I'm going to be asking are from the perspective of the newbie who doesn't have a very strong integrated practice. Other than, the few classes that he's taken and the shadow boxing he does when he's on the phone. But what do we want to talk about today, guys? Let's dig right into it.
Well, I was going to start with the rhythm. Maybe actually you can ask that question that you did earlier when we were off air about the rhythm, and we can segue into that because that was great. So what were you talking about with that?
Yeah. So, the other day, Will, when you came to visit me in Canmore, you were kind of showing me a jab where I'm getting a back and forth rhythm a little bit. And I time my jab to the forward, punch, back. And you kind of develop this rhythm. And that's a baseline rhythm for a boxing practice, right? You got the stiff ankles. I think you're pretty Soviet boxing influenced. And, I was thinking about this idea of rhythm because I see a lot of, great boxers and great fighters develop a little bit of a rhythm when they're fighting. And that rhythm, obviously, you can take advantage of that fascial recoil that we talk about in so many episodes. There's probably a biomechanical benefit to developing a rhythm. But my question was, when you're in the context of an actual fight, an actual martial engagement with someone, wouldn't having a definitive rhythm where even though you can get into your own rhythm, isn't that something that your opponent would be able to read? Doesn't that make your striking more predictable? Does that leave you open to attack because they can time their strikes to your rhythm? On one hand, it seems like a useful drill because it allows you to sort of sync your movements together, sync what's happening at the lower body with the upper body in terms of I got this ankle shuffle going on back and forth and I'm timing my jabs to it. But then if I'm doing that and I have this rhythm, can't they just counter the rhythm that I've established for myself? Do I need to be constantly changing the rhythm? What's the go there? What's your take on that?
So I'll start off with that. Basically, I was showing you a drill. For beginners, it's very important to know that your punch has to come with a step. You have to be rooted into the ground as your punch goes, right? Especially off the beginning, it's very important to understand that. However, after a while, that no longer applies. I mean, the rule of you hitting the ground with your foot applies, but you don't keep the same rhythm. You're going to try to disguise it, especially if you're in a bout. And that's what it's all about. It's about making your opponent guess what you're going to do. If you're just moving back and forth the whole time, you have only a couple options: move back or move forward really quickly, right? So you have to mix it up and you have to break your rhythm. And it's about tricking the opponent. So if the opponent can read it, then you're in trouble, right? Is there anything to add to that, Rudy?
No, I think you're saying it right. I think the rhythm, everyone has their own rhythm, right? Everyone has their own beats when it comes to it. But you can use it as a weapon as well. Sometimes I'll set a rhythm, and then what it is it becomes predictable, but maybe that's exactly what I want you to think. Then there's something called off rhythm. So maybe I'll do the step, and you think it's a jab, and you'll try to do something that would counter a jab, but it's just a trap that I set for you for me to be able to take advantage. So rhythm is a positive and a negative. You can use it offensively, and you could also use it in a way that opens up opportunities for you as well.
Yeah, so this opens up a huge discussion here because a coach, Barry Robinson, who's a very popular boxing coach, and I believe he's in MMA right now. I follow his channel, really popular, and he does say the rhythm step, which is what he calls that, a step that is predictable with rhythm, is super dangerous. Now, a lot of Soviet guys, a lot of guys from the East do this type of step where it's in and out. And I believe his argument is that the guys who bounce in and out, they have to bounce before they attack. So you can time that. And as long as you time that correctly, you know when they're coming in and they're at a disadvantage. So you don't want to be using these types of rhythm steps. Also, there's a habit of a lot of boxers and a lot of Muay Thai fighters and a lot of MMA practitioners to do an L step. So basically, you back up one step and you move out to the side in an L shape. Okay. But his argument is that when you move back, you're actually not going anywhere. When you go to take that L step, you've actually only moved one step, but you've done two moves. So your opponent can time you and angle you off. And he shows a lot of clips where that's happening. The person takes the L step, the opponent knows when to go and times the movement at that portion. That's what I understand from Barry Robinson's argument. Do you have anything to say to that? Because I know you watch him too.
Yeah. What it is it's the habitual nature of it. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, and you're doing it mindlessly, which I think is what's important, then you become predictable because now I can kind of guess where you're going to end up. I like to say it's like I don't want to hit where you are. I want to hit where I think you're going to be, right? Especially when there's a lot of head movement. Like think of like football, right? A quarterback doesn't always throw directly to a receiver. He's throwing to where that route is going to end, so that way he can lead the pass behind the defender who is over the defender who is trailing the receiver. So sometimes that L step can be very predictable because people use that. It's just kind of like this mindless thing where you're like, all right, I'm just going to reset. And that's when it can get you in trouble. But to put it as a blanket statement where we say, you know, the L step is always dangerous, it's not true. If you think of the L step as just getting your feet together, then that gives me more mobility to move left or right. So I might come this way, I might bring that foot back, fake like I'm going to go left. You try to cut me off, and then it leaves me to go around you in the opposite direction. And there's high level fighters that use it all the time that don't get knocked out. I was looking at a video earlier of Terrence Crawford, who has some of the best footwork, and he's not like a dancey fighter. He's very technical in everything that he does, and he uses an L step just fine. And then even on Barry Robinson's page, there's a highlight of someone using an L step that he doesn't talk about, but he uses it as a highlight of a fighter who is a hybrid grappler striker. And it can get you in trouble, but literally anything in the fight game could get you in trouble. If you're doing the same jab over and over, someone can use that to come over the top and make the adjustment.
Yeah. So do you think there is an advantage to being a fighter like Terrence Crawford where you're more measured, you're moving inches, right? Inches forward, inches back, inches to the side. Shakur Stevenson also comes to mind with that. Versus a Soviet boxer who's bouncy in and out. Lomachenko, Usyk, Triple G a little bit, although he's a little bit more rooted now. There's a few guys like this, right? Do you see an advantage either way, or can both be used? And if you were to make a fighter, could you put both in there?
That's what I believe in. I believe both, and I believe applicability, and I believe in adaptability. To be able to use either one depending on who you're fighting. You know, let's say someone who has that advantage against you is more powerful and more planted, and you're not going to be able to sit in the phone booth with them and trade shots because they're landing more, right? Why would you want to do that? So you would exit in and out, be more bouncy. And it also helps to disguise your bigger, more drastic movements. If I'm feinting with my steps and then I use that to come in and come out like a fencer, it will give me that advantage without having to deal with someone like a Tyson where why would I fight to his advantages? And on the flip side, it's also, you know, really consumes energy, right? It's not for all body types. So you have to kind of mold it to your style. So sometimes you have no choice and you're going to have to fight within the inside, or maybe you want to be able to fight in the inside to fight someone who is doing the bouncy stuff. It's all about adaptability and adjusting, and that's what all the best fighters do. That's what separates Terrence Crawford. That's what separates Floyd Mayweather. Even when in the most recent boxing match with Canelo versus Bivol, Canelo was landing some shots, and then he couldn't make the adjustment when Bivol did, and he was taking advantage of all these little nuances. And that is the key, being adaptable, having the ability to do both.
Would you say Bivol is a example of both? Because he does have that Soviet style, and he does stay in the pocket well.
He does stay in the pocket well, and he's able to come in and out. He's like, I've never heard of the guy before, because I've been more in the historical end of boxing, and I've always looked at boxing as a subset of mixed martial arts. So I had a friend telling me that Bivol was going to win, and I was like, I don't know. I've never heard of the guy. And then you see him piece up Canelo, who has been in the Matrix for the past, 4 or 5 fights where no one can touch him, and he was landing in multiple combinations. He was fighting inside with him. They were going guard to guard, and he was landing. It was amazing to watch. And yeah, it's like he's able to fight at the end, right? He's able to fight at the end of his punches and keep in these ranges, but at the same time, you're opening up more possibilities of getting hit because you're fighting within a tighter range. And he was a master at being able to come in, and you would see him keep space. One hand would be out and his left hand was ready, locked and loaded. And he would just step in, step out, step in, step out. And I mean, my own personal opinion, I think injuries and age limit you, right? Because that bounciness, that taekwondo, not only does it require a lot of energy, but if you have mechanics, or I don't want to get into that, if you have injuries in your lower extremities, it becomes costly. And then you start to see him lean more into that boxing stance that is not so up and down. You see him leaning more on that lead leg instead of splitting the difference. And again, this is all good for boxing, but in MMA, if you're leaning on that leg is going to be eaten. And that's what Dustin Poirier did. He was just chopping, chopping, chopping. And if he continues to use that boxing style, that's one of the weaknesses of it. You have to be mindful of that. When you're translating something to MMA, you have to understand what are the weaknesses, right? So another example, sorry to go on the rant, Justin Gaethje, right? He does a lot of head movement where he puts his head right by the guy's belly button. And, in boxing, you're not going to get hit with a hard uppercut. You're going to miss hits. You're going to miss hooks. But in MMA, I can throw a knee and bash you in the forehead, right? That's a very dangerous space to be in when you're doing that. So it's worked out effectively for him, but all it takes is the right coach to make the adjustment and be like, all right, well, when I throw a hook, he likes to duck under, so I'm gonna fake a hook and throw a knee, right? I'll set the rhythm of a hook. He's gonna do something predictable to go right into something that I want him to do.
Yeah, it's very interesting stuff there. Now with Conor, how much of his training do you think applies here? Like, I know he switched to boxing, and it may be because he trained so much for Mayweather. That seemed to be when he switched. But also, I've watched his training, and it's a lot of bodybuilding type muscle work. And I would predict from watching that his rhythm would get diminished and his muscle would take over. And that's what we're seeing from his fighting, right? So do you think that plays a part, or do you think it is injuries and age?
I think it's multi-variable. I think it all plays a part in it. I think the concentric training helps to pull you out of that elastic kind of rhythmic style, right? Because you're not, when you're lifting, you guys both lifted, so your heels are going to be on the ground. You're going to be doing a sharp concentric and maybe not so much focus on the eccentric, right? Versus a more elastic style of training, you're going to embody that, right? That's where you find power. And from my perspective, I don't think that's ideal or optimal. There's ways that you can train with weights and such that will help translate better to sports. But yeah, like you said, I think the training, in my opinion, is going to inhibit you because that's not how you're going to be using it in sport. That's not, or at least not within that specific sport.
That particular sport, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about strength training for the specific application of combat sports. Do you have specific training tools or training methods that you like to use that will translate to maybe the fascial properties that you're looking for, that will help you retain that bounce and that elasticity, that snappiness, but will
Mhm.
increase your strength specifically?
Yeah. So I prioritize elastic type of training, right? So um, inertia wave, if you're familiar with it, I'm sure you guys
Hmm.
are. Right. So I'll have this kind of tension, it's tugging me, and I'm countering that by using my posterior chain muscles. But then I also have this bounce, right? And there's synchronization to it. And what I'm teaching there is to keep that posterior chain engaged, but in a rhythmic fashion, right? Similar to when I'm in a fight, right? So I want this bounce, this rhythm that I'm trying to set in order for me to build off of. Another thing that I use is I'll use a pool noodle, right? A whole pool noodle, right? So it's really, really light, but if it's long enough, right? And I just hold it in the middle and I start to twist it really, really, really fast, it's going to fight the wind. It's going to not cut through so well. And I'm just turning and turning and turning, and my shoulder starts to cook. And what I'm conditioning is that snap, right? I can start, I
Mm.
have different levels that I usually do when I'm working with people. Level one is just hold it and twist maximal end each one. Boom, 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 boom. Then your shoulder starts to cook. And then once you get more practice with it and you don't really have to focus, it's this twist and pull and push at the same time. So not only is the pool noodle giving me resistance this way, it's giving me resistance this way at the same time.
Mm.
And I'm again conditioning something more realistic to what I would be using it when I'm fighting. And then I can even hold two pool noodles, you know. I like rope flow as well for that wind resistance while still conditioning. I like Oh, so there's one that I was gonna say for a video, but I'll put it here. You guys know the slingshot, Mark Bell slingshot,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Right. So it puts that tension right here, right? And I have a thing where I say you punch with your back muscles, and your front muscles are where you place them. So what I teach with the Mark Bell slingshot is to create a plyometric exercise where I pull back like this, and then I'll just have them there and just spam this, boom, 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 and you're learning how to excite those back muscles backwards, right? Because that's how I'll teach a punch. Instead of thinking like this, you want to come backwards and your
Mm.
chest will bring the arm forward. And then you can release depending on what your goal is, if I'm throwing straight or if I'm throwing round. But the idea is that I come back and that elastic tug kind of brings my arms forward. So the only thing I really need to focus on is bringing my arms back. And, you know, it really, really helps to develop those tissues, the type 2 muscles within those fibers, within that area.
So that would be more of like a like you're training the loading, because when I think of it's funny because the original criticism I had of the slingshot is it feels like you're outsourcing the elasticity of the pecs and the anterior deltoids, right? And so you're literally outsourcing it to something. And anytime you're outsourcing a certain quality or something, my issue is always like, well, aren't you going to teach your body to not do that itself, right? But it
Yeah.
sounds like it's very specific to that pull back
Yes.
first,
You're
right?
using it in
And
the
and you're
opposite.
still working the elasticity with other things, right? You're still working that anterior elasticity with
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
contexts. But that would be my only, like, okay, well, you're using this slingshot, you're outsourcing that elastic
Hmm.
snap back, but the actual pull, that pop, that's something
Hmm.
that you do on your own. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really,
Hmm.
really interesting. So um would you say that like these things like the inertia wave, it's almost like, is that a reactive stability type of thing? I've talked about reactive stability to different people before, and even I took David Weck's propulsors, and I worked with Devin from One of a Kind Fitness a little bit, and he had me back here shaking them
Hmm.
rhythmically, same
Yeah.
thing, kind of
Yep.
having this
Yep.
reactive thing. My shoulder, like in terms of surgery recovery, like 3 or 4 weeks of that, it was
Hmm.
like 10 out of 10 better compared to all the other rehab stuff that I was doing just from this reactive stability stuff. And again, what I'm finding is that like it has this, like when I'm running, because again, right now my big biomechanical research in terms of my own practice is running and my arm swing and seeing how different stimuli affect my gait. But I found that
Hmm.
when I swing my arm back, And again, it is the focus on the swing back, not the swing forward. It has this good balance that just, and that's kind of that is one of David Weck's ideas, is you push down, the up is free sort of idea. So is that when you're using that slingshot, are you focusing on that back with the forward being free kind of thing?
Yeah, that's how I look at it. I think about coming backwards, right? I say, you want to rip a lawnmower cord, right? I'm trying to pull back really quickly, and then I get this bounce to come forward, and I can use the front musculature to add a little bit of oomph to it, right? But I don't want that to be the main driver. And also, I also think of them as a way to help me. I call it the guiding system, right? If my back muscles, my posterior chain is the propulsion system, my front muscles are the targeting system, right? So I'm going to cock it back, and then I'm going to use my muscles to place it, right? So no matter what, and I can also use that to disguise my intent as well. Like if it looks like I'm going to throw a hook because I'm coming round, and then all of a sudden I come up like a Tyson-esque uppercut, not only does it add a little bit more oomph, but I might be creating an opening for myself where you might think a hook is coming. So it's like, oh, short punch, I'm going to lean back, and then this comes up under your guard and puts you to sleep. It is what I like to focus on when it comes to punching with power, but also using it in volume striking as well. Because most people think, I call it a unga boonga punch, right? I'm going to smash you, right? I'm going to put my arm all the way back here like this, right? But you can also do it. I think I've said it here before. I can put my pinky to my cheek, and the key here is my shoulder comes back. My guard opens up, right? But just a little bit, and nothing is perfect when it comes to fighting, right? So yeah, you can just do this, keep your guard, and just bring your shoulder blades together like this. Boom, boom. I even do this with the slingshot, right? I got the lightest resistance because I was experimenting with it, and I'm gonna go a size up more, or a resistance up, and you basically just have the slingshot here. I can be as close to the sport application as I can, and then I'll just pump this back like this, boom, boom. And then if I were to turn it into a punch, it's just boom, boom.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's go ahead.
Yeah, so that's really interesting stuff. A few things come to mind. The push pull. Just to clarify for the audience, the pull would be with the opposite side of what you're punching with, correct? Yeah, because I think people get confused with that. They're like, what do you mean punch out and then I pull back? It's like, no, you're actually pulling with the opposite lat so that it recoils as you propel your arm. Now, a lot of people would be like, well, you're not thinking about that portion of the punch. But for me, I do have to think about different parts of my punch to perfect it, right? Sometimes I think about the hand. Sometimes I'm thinking about where my elbow is coming up. Sometimes I'm thinking about accelerating at the shoulder. Because a lot of times you can't just use your body mechanics. You're disguising a punch, or just the angle of the punch doesn't allow you to move in a certain direction. So you may have to keep tighter in a certain part of the body, right? So that switches things from just being an automatic throwing action to a more controlled action. And that's where you get the higher level boxing, right? So, yeah, those are all interesting points. With the slingshot, are you pulling it back with both arms, or are you pulling it back one arm at a time and using the other one to punch?
I'm experimenting at the moment. Right now, I just spam this at the moment to really develop the plyometric of pulling back. And I've tried a couple of different things of keeping the guard and pulling back one way. I think for me, once I get a higher resistance, I can really start to pinpoint where are going to be ideal exercises, just because I use the one, I think it's called the push-up pro or push-up plus or something. It's light. So when I do this, it doesn't feel very engaging. It feels like I could do it almost like an endurance exercise, which isn't too bad, right? If I want to start to really ingrain that movement pattern. But if I want to add a little bit more oomph to it, probably more resistance, and then I think pinning this down back here. But I recently I should say recently, about a week ago, I did a video of Tyson throwing punches. I think it was for his dynamic striking video series where when he throws a punch, he brings both his arms back before it comes forward. And, he's one of the most powerful punchers in the history of boxing, right? And I really slowed it down so you can really see, like, your arms are going back when you really want to hurt somebody. And it doesn't have to be this big, wide punch. It could be a pump and brought forward by the drive. So it is elastic as well as a motor drive. So let me see if I can do this here, right? I got this thing. This is how I like to explain how a punch works, right? So this would be me using my muscle, right? Here's my hand. Can you hear it? It's real light, right? And then my hand is relaxed, and this is me using just the elasticity of my tendons. Now here, I'm going to use both at the same time. I'm going to pull back and drive. Does that make sense? So when I'm coming back,
a great illustration,
right?
actually.
Yeah, I'm loading up that elasticity, and then not only do I get the free drive, but I also get the oomph of me putting the power behind it, and that's basically what I'm teaching you.
So this is interesting, because this is actually how, when I was my strongest in barbell sports in the gym, it's funny because I was really strong, but I wasn't even particularly muscular. And I always had a laugh because I'd be next to these like 200 something pound bodybuilders, out squatting them, out benching them, doing all this stuff. And the way that I did it was there would be a controlled eccentric about 3/4 of the way down. And then I would almost accelerate it for that last bit, bounce and drive up as hard as I could. So I would get the stretch reflex, the elasticity, and drive up that last little bit. And there wasn't a ton of concentric force. I was trying to minimize like too much, minimize a lot of eccentric action and rely a lot on elasticity. And you'd watch my squats, I would bounce out of the hole with a bench. I wouldn't bounce the bar off my chest, but I could get down low and it would look like it bounced, right? And so
it's like you're digging it.
Pretty much. So instead of allowing it to come down and resisting gravity, I would resist gravity about 3/4 of the way. So I have this eccentric action, right? But then I would pull it down and bounce it out. I'm using a bench as an example because that's what you can see on my body, but I would do that for multiple things. Do you think that that type of action where you're load, like if you could, maybe let's take a one arm dumbbell press, for example, because I'm always saying we've pretty much established in most of our episodes that lifting weights, the way that is conventionally done, doesn't have a huge amount of biomechanical application as it translates to movement. But I'm almost seeing here where there could be almost a similar tissue action happening with what you're describing with the way that I used to lift weights, right? So if you let's take a one arm dumbbell press, you have your fist turned out at the top, right, of the movement, and you're lowering. Could you pull in and bounce out with like a dumbbell? Do you think that might have like an application, or do you think that's making things complicated for no reason?
I don't think it's making things complicated, and I wouldn't want to just say no, that's wrong. I think I would try to get as close to the sport as possible. So I would prefer that they would be standing up, right, or in a particular stance, or so on and so forth. But that's not ideal if you want to load up. You know what I mean? But then again, if you load up, your muscles and body are going to behave in a different way. So it's hard for me to just say yes, and it's hard for me to just say no. I'd probably experiment with that, and then I'd let the numbers tell me. I'd probably experiment it with myself, and then if I notice, like, oh, this elasticity is really helping me, or this the weight helps me get into that muscle movement pattern, and so on and so forth. I believe that the eccentric portion is definitely going to help you, right? I believe you want to be long and strong as I'm pulling back. But when I think about lifting, I think, well, all right, if I'm going to be doing that in the position, my core is probably going to be braced. And that's one thing that'll limit my punches. Two, my shoulders aren't going to be doing this, right? So whenever I throw a punch, boom, even if it's just a jab, this right here, not only does it add length, it adds a little bit of power. So I'm not teaching that as well. So the what I like to say is when I'm focusing on this right here like this, it's kind of like me doing weighted calf raises so I can jump higher vertically. Should I work on this thing or should I work on the system as a whole? And I'm not saying there isn't efficacy, and I'd probably test it out, but as of right now, I probably wouldn't do it with clients. I just test it on
Yeah,
myself and then see.
totally. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like how could you make it more systemically engaged, right? Like the first
Hmm.
thought that I had would be like, could you do like a slow eccentric punch on a cable machine, and then
Hmm.
on that last quarter, bounce out of it and
Yeah,
pop it
yeah,
as hard as you can. If you have a constant tension cable
yep,
machine, could you do
yes,
something like that? Right?
yeah.
Because again, you like it's the like I'm thinking of the style of lifting specifically,
Hmm.
and like obviously if your back is flat on a bench, and even if you're doing the one
Yeah.
arm, you still don't get that rotation back and that
Hmm.
rotation forward
Hmm.
unless you have like a half pipe bench of some sort,
Yeah, yeah.
pretty fucking
Or you're
cool actually.
leaning one shoulder and you're trying to do it that way. There's ways that you can do it, but then again, it all is going to change how it would be done. And
Exactly.
how much transferability is there? Would I be better off? Because specifically when it comes to MMA, the amount of skill acquisition is insane, right? Like think
Mm,
about like just learning boxing. There's really only what 8 punches in boxing, and then there's combinations, and then there's stances, and then there's distance and body types. Well, now let's add kickboxing, taekwondo, muay thai, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and all this stuff. Then you got your strength and conditioning. Oh, by the way, you have a family. It's going to be so overwhelming on you that you have to find ways to pack things together. So that's why I try to combine the skill acquisition with the
mm.
strength and conditioning, so that way you're always acquiring skill while at the same time looking for a particular response, whether it be cardio or it be power, right?
Well, I tend to agree with that. Uh, how about this? Skill acquisition, let's say a bench press or a
Hmm.
squat versus you in jujitsu having to squeeze somebody with your legs and your arms. Is there transferability? Are you working the skill, or are you better off doing those reps, those
Yeah,
1 rep maxes, squeezing as hard as you can? Right. I
Well,
would
yeah.
say it's more applicable to squeeze as hard as you can and use that as your 1 rep
Hmm.
max.
but can
Hmm.
I give like almost like an anecdotal trope here a little bit? My
Yeah,
brother
sure.
and I have very different training backgrounds, and my brother's a huge dude just naturally. He's like built like me, but just wider, like he's a huge like a big dude, and he's done basically nothing but jujitsu. Like he didn't do any lifting,
Mm.
and he lost 80 pounds just doing jujitsu basically, and he was doing it for a couple years. Ranked up his belts and did some tournaments. And he was a good jujitsu fighter, and we were both visiting my dad in California at the same time. It's like, all right, let's go outside and roll. Let's just like wrestle around. I'm like, all right, you're gonna fucking kill me because I don't do jujitsu, right? Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I did a little bit of wrestling, and like I kind of know the basics of passing guards and stuff, just some basic
Mhm.
basic stuff from hanging around with the right people, and I've watched enough of it, right? And I'm pretty good at translating the watching to the doing, generally speaking. So I was like, all right, UFC for Xbox, let's see if it applies. But anyway, like my training was uh maximum tension training for gymnastics skills, high tension gymnastics skills, end range training, and heavy squats and like heavy deadlifts, and like all this stuff that's like force output. And my brother was like, we were tussling around and we were rolling, and he was like, fuck, I out technique you like crazy, but you are so fucking strong. It is hard to do anything with you. Like it's hard to move you around and get you to the positions, because you can kind of feel where I'm going, and you can just resist it with like brute force. And it's
Mhm.
like in the end, he got me in a position that he got me to tap, but he was like, it took him like 20 minutes, right? Like we were rolling around for like 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like I think there is an applicability. Now the other thing is too, the more tension that I'm creating, like I exhausted myself. Like I was like, by the end of that
Mhm.
20 minutes, I almost was like, all right, fucking armbar me, bro, so that I can stop this. I'm tired. Right. So
Yeah.
so you aren't efficient in these positions. My
Mhm.
question is like, is some of this, we talked with Graham Tuttle, who was the barefoot sprinter. He was the first person that I've ever heard who's like, yeah, man, Joel Seedman's 90 degree stuff. It's great. You know, I'm thinking is like, is there a place where you're loading yourself up and you're creating this high nervous system tension, and you're developing the skill of creating tension and force
Mhm.
with it, but then like, you know, having that be like, I remember actually, did you guys ever read Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Body?
No, I've never
I
read that.
It was like
maybe
it was like it was like one of my first fitness books that I ever read, and he tells this story about this guy who trained these like 16-year-old sprinter girls by getting them to like deadlift over 400 pounds to their knees and then drop it, right? So that's like, it's just like, it's a huge load, and but like once a week at the most. It's like, it's not a lot, but it's enough nervous system input. And they started
Mhm.
sprinting super super fast, not even a
Mhm.
full concentric where you're extending and you're locking out your hips. They would deadlift to the knees, pause for a second, and drop it. And they did that very very infrequently, and their force output and their speed, it just like, it flew up. Like, it was very minimal. All the rest was sprint specific training and bounding stuff, like plyometric stuff. And I was thinking, okay, like, I hadn't thought about that book in like 10 years, like since it came out
Yeah.
essentially. But as I've been thinking about, like, does strength training, does this nervous system, does this force output have a role? Could it affect you know, sports like mixed martial arts in certain ways? Because obviously my strength was an advantage when I was trying to defend against my brother, who had 2+ years of jujitsu technique specific training and running drills over and over and over again. He still had a hard time dealing with me. Could you, like, what's your take on having that be beneficial for even say a boxer?
I I think that there is benefits. I do think that there is going to be a way where your ability to create these forces, right, is going to be a good thing that you're learning from it. But when you do them over and over and over again, you get good at the thing that you're doing and
Yeah.
less good at the thing that you wanted to translate to. So I'm big on complex sets and also contrast sets, right? So I might have you do something that's really strenuous, right, in order to gain that neural input. And then I'm going to do something sport specific so we can take that input and put it into something else. Because I do believe like there are things that you can do, like I forgot the name of those exercises. I can't think of it. Overcoming isometrics,
Okay. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
right, yeah, that your body is going to want to kick into overdrive, and then you take that and you make it elastic, right? You're increasing the neural response, right? And then you want to ingrain it into something. I like to say it's like when you put a donut on the end of a bat and you're swinging, and then you take it off. Now your swing is a little bit more powerful because your body is kind of compensating for it. Um, but I think if you do it a lot, you get good at that, but then you become less good at other things. So it's like what you said. They were doing 400 pounds. They would do it once a week. And it wasn't a full range deadlift, you know, like we're judging it and you have to lock out here and
Mhm.
there. It was from point A to point B. And then, all right, now let's take that drive and put it into something else. I'm all for that. I like that.
Mhm.
What do you think,
What do you
Will?
think, Will?
That's an interesting point. Right off the get-go, what I was thinking is your brother, theoretically, I think he could have done a 1 rep max in jujitsu positions, right? And
Mhm.
that would be like his 1 rep max in a squat, right? There is something to tension, to being able to hold
Mm-hmm.
tension.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the best jujitsu guys do lift because they want to get bigger and they want to be bigger for that purpose, right? But
Mm-hmm.
could they apply it more correctly? Could they do the 1 rep max in jujitsu positions? I
Mm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Are people doing this? Not sure, right? Is there
Yeah.
some applicability to overstimulus training? I think there is something to it. I haven't experimented enough to know myself personally, but I do a little bit of overcoming isometrics. WEC actually calls it limit force elastic training, right? And it's the
Yeah.
same type of concept. So I was introduced to it by him a while ago, and I have played with it.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that at a certain level, if you want to learn, like I'm 38, I want to learn so
Mhm.
many different martial arts that I have to let go of my nervous system.
Yeah.
by just the amount of skills I'm coming in.
Yeah.
But I don't have room for even a 400-pound deadlift. Like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
my brain is tired, my body's tired. I haven't really done anything hard, but that's all I got. So yeah, I think there's something to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're getting into goal specific context now, right? And I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
probably in terms of like athletic development. Like for you, your movement practice is martial arts, so you're looking for interesting ways and new and basically new combinations of movements and different things. I feel like a martial artist in general will drill a lot of the basics over and over and over to gain a general
Mm-hmm.
proficiency and the ability to improvise contextually. But then also like there's the athletic capacity. Like you need to have an athletic
Mm-hmm.
capacity, you need to have strength, you need to have the whip on your punches, you need to have the strength to try and control, you need to understand your body distribution. And in terms of like having a martial arts based movement practice for a practice's sake versus the athletic development of an athlete, that's kind of what I'm exploring. Is like, is there like how can you overload your, like, to me, having a max level squeeze on someone in a full guard with like, you're crushing this guy's fucking midsection as your 1 rep max, is that going to be as effective as creating progressive overload, with something that you can track the weight on? Are you going to put, like, what are you going to do, like a pressure plate to really track your progressive overload? And maybe again it's irrelevant, right? Like, this is just hypothetical, and
Yeah.
I'm playing off of it because I always as a habitual gym rat, I'm always saying, it's like, how can I sneak a little bit more gym bro stuff into this movement and biomechanics culture that I've sort of adapted for my own practice, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I feel you on that because I used to love barbell rows, bent over barbell rows. That's one of my favorite ways, and I don't feel the same tightness in my lats that I used to. And I used to love that feeling of having a big back. And I'm like, well, maybe if I just do a little bit of this, I'll be okay. Um, I think just there's room for it with what your intended goal is, as long as you're applying it the right way. I'm not someone that's a zealot when it comes to certain things where it's like, I'll
Mm.
never do anything just because, I don't just train MMA athletes. I have a baseball player that's going to be working with me in the summer. So I have to train him a little bit differently. I've had, I've had bodybuilders and power lifters that came to me that want to learn little bit of mixed martial arts, but also how can I make my movements better when it comes to sports, when it comes to lifting, right? And I can't just say, well, no, it's bad, so I can't help you there. It's then
Mhm.
I'm, you know what I mean? Like I'll say like, here, I don't know, do this within my own training, but perhaps if we start to take certain things into consideration, it might help you. And for the most part, it has.
Mm.
It's just a matter of balance and priority.
Yeah.
And I think, Will, like when you're talking about your nervous system being super cooked, is because you're prioritizing complexity of movement over
Hmm.
like how hard you can throw a punch, right? Or how hard
Hmm.
you can squeeze a guy in a full guard in a jujitsu situation.
Well, it still is. I want to punch really hard, but I'm doing it from the
Yeah.
elastic forces and the
Yeah.
way I can harness my body. So I'm like a 160. You know what I mean? So it's like if I'm throwing a punch, I have to put my weight into it. So it's better for me to propel my body as I'm doing it than just try to load up a punch from the same spot, right?
Hmm.
And my advantage would be I can punch here, I can create an angle quickly and punch here, right? It's not going to be
Hmm.
me standing in front of you for a long period of time, right? So if I was to train, it would be that context versus um, pure power. It's like how many boxers need or martial artists need that much more power, where
Hmm.
that linear force translation is just going to knock someone to the moon. You know what I mean? It's just most people need to be able to move better, to be healthier between camps,
Yeah.
um, things like that versus just pure power, right? So that's another
Hmm.
reason I would kind of sideline that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's actually a good point too, where it's you don't need a lot. I like to say you need dynamic power. You need to be able to, well, especially in combat sports. I can't. It's not just about I'm going to hit you really hard. I have to be able to pull it out in a split second, in time, in rhythm, and that is much harder to do when you're braced, when you're stiff, and when you're thinking very Lego man-y, if that makes sense, right? Because you're limiting certain things versus wanting to be more flowy and elastic, and that's power that is you're able to use better when you're on the move and moving rhythmically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right?
Have you watched Conor McGregor's recent videos punching really, really hard, doing power punching? Is that because his nervous system, like, I know we can speculate, right? And that's all I'm doing here. It's because his nervous system wants to do those hard maneuvers, right? If right now he was to do his old bouncy style, I know he broke his leg, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
If he was to do his old bouncy style, flowy Ido Portal stuff, would he look as good doing it? Or does his nervous system want to do those big power punches right now because he's been training?
I think that's where he's finding his power now, if that makes sense. It's about sequencing, right? And if you don't find your previous movement capabilities to be optimal because they hurt or you're not as bouncy or you're getting more tired, you're going to look for power in a way that if you're just the subtle shifting of his weight to being more into his lead leg, right? You can find the power within that particular body position, which is probably maybe why he is throwing punches like that instead of the way he used to throw. And like you can see now, he kind of does this thing where he's boxing and he kind of like reaches out now, and he never really used to do that. He used to stay more 50-50 and kind of bounce in, and then turn over. But now he's like trying to find his range, and where your body is 100% how you fight, right? The subtle shift, if I'm in my back leg, right? If I'm like this, I'm much more likely to hit you here because my weight is in my back leg. If I'm in my front leg, I'm much more likely to hit you from here, right? Because I shift my body from back leg to front leg. But if I'm 50-50, there's less of this shift, and it's more of this kind of inside-outside fencing bounce. Mm-hmm. So that's a rhythm, and that's also something that can be read. And, it also, if you're flat foot, you're more of a target. And you see him get landed more. I mean, he's getting finished now, actually. So I think his finding of power within this stance is him trying to have power the way he used to, but I feel like it's limiting him. That's my own personal opinion. This is me talking about a guy who's getting paid millions to fight people, but I've also observed, and you guys also as well, there is something to watching somebody's style change drastically from how it used to be. Like, he used to open the fight with spin kicks and all these, and he, again, his range was much wider, and I don't want to say more athletic because he's still athletic, but it was much more. You'll see spinning back kicks and this all these types of maneuvers that were more costly, and also, in my opinion, require a healthy body. It's much harder to do these things when you have broken limbs and wrecked connective tissue, and also when you're older and it costs you more, right? Because you don't get more athletic as you get older. I mean, contrary to like Tom Brady or maybe Mike Tyson, right? These guys that don't seem to age out. But I think one of the biggest things that happens as you get older, people will gain weight and you'll see them go into heavyweight. Think like John Jones, right? You lose that cardio capability and you start to get smarter, if that makes sense, because you have to, right? I have to be more precise because for every miss, my power is diminishing much, much greater than the way it used to when I was younger and I just had it on hand. So yeah, I think I went off on a rant there a little bit.
Anything to add to that one, Anthony?
Yeah. In terms of why do you think that as people age, they become less athletic? I know there's like some theories in terms of like the elastin in our tissues kind of degrades over time. Like what's the take on like why we become less quote athletic all the time as we age? And like, how are we even defining athleticism you know, because you're like, oh, Connor, I
Mm,
wouldn't say he's less athletic, but he's definitely less smooth. He's less fluid. He's not,
mm,
you know, he doesn't have as much control or bounce, right? So, how are we defining athleticism, and why do people seem to
mm.
become less athletic as they age?
I think athleticism is the umbrella term, and then
Mm,
you have smoothness, power, explosiveness, and whatever. Insert something into that category when you
mhm,
start to see those things diminish over time in comparison to where they are now, and you see their style change drastically, right? Where someone who was very wide in their attacks becomes more hyper focused on certain things, less cardio, or sometimes less knockout power, more cardio, because of whatever. Maybe they're more sparing, right? And they notice when they throw a lot of punches that are hard and they can't carry over to the next round, they start to have that strike volume come down. But at least they're fighting more over the long haul, if that makes sense. Whereas
mhm,
someone who's explosive will come out the gates really hard, then they'll be needing a rest between the middle rounds, and then maybe they'll have that second win in the fourth and fifth. Um, Versus someone being very sparingly. I like to think of like Yoel Romero, where he's. I mean, me saying Yoel Romero is unathletic would be, uh, it doesn't make any sense because you look at him, he looks like he's made out of marble. But at the same time, he'll throw three punches in an entire round and stand there like this. And, it's not something that he would used to do. He'd just run you over. So he's very, very sparing with his power. So
mm,
I when I say losing athleticism, I don't mean like he's going to be one of us regular folk now. I mean like in
mm,
comparison to where they used to be athletically.
mhm.
And I, I think age is. I think it's multifactorial. I think everything is multifactorial. That's my blanket statement. My get out of jail free card. Multifactorial. But your tissues age, right? And then
Mhm.
also everything is breaking down. And little by little you start to feel those aches that would you could ignore, or they would go away. They're not going away as fast, or your recovery isn't the same, where you used to be able to do 5 days a week straight and then maybe take a day off and then do another five. Now you're doing two and like, oh, you know what, I don't think I'm not feeling too good. Like I can do an intense workout, the next day do another intense workout, 10 years later intense workout, then it's going to go down for a couple days and then come back. you know I think that is how you judge when someone starts to dip in their athleticism. It's happened to me. I tell people when I was from 18 to 24, I'm 5'10". I used to be able to dunk a basketball. And people look at me like, what the fuck are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. I'm like, yeah, but injuries and also these whites, they kicked my ass. So now I'm a coach and I teach people how to do athletic stuff.
Yeah,
Well,
they're
that was like when I was 21 to like 23, I was trying to see if I could overtrain myself. You know, I was going 7 days a
Yeah.
week, twice a day. I
Yes.
was like, what's my
No pain, no
capacity to
gain.
overtrain? And
Right.
because I read this article by Charles Poliquin, and he had this overreach, like this deliberate overreaching program that he used with Olympic athletes. He would train twice a day for 6 days a week, for 2 weeks, and then you would take 5 days off and just stuff your fucking face and like, oh, I'm going home for Christmas. This is perfect. You know, I'm gonna go eat all my mom's delicious food, and I'm gonna just drive myself into the ground. And I felt amazing. I was like training hard, like at like 90% of my one rep maxes on all my lifts, like all like the squat, deadlift, bench, overhead, pull-ups, everything that I was training myself 3 hours a day. I put on like 10 pounds of muscle and like felt great. And I was like, well, this didn't work. And now, the joke is like, after I turned 26, 27, I was burning out super, super hard when I tried to even just do like
Yeah.
6 days a week consistently. Right. So the recovery thing definitely is a factor. And like, my joke is like, I felt really athletic naturally at like from like 21 to 23. I felt like dog shit basically from like 25 to 28. And now that I'm more movement oriented at 32, and I'm focusing more kind of on some of the rebounding stuff and not trashing my nervous system and just pumping my muscles all the time, I feel more athletic than I did through my mid 20s. But nothing's gonna ever beat that that feeling of like being invincible at
Yeah.
21, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
That's
really about
definitely true.
managing breakdown, right? Like your
Hmm.
body's constantly building and it's constantly breaking. When you're in your 20s, you're building, building, building. You can go out,
Yeah.
all night and you'll still recover and be able to train. I wouldn't even think
Hmm.
about doing that now, right? So it is
No.
about
Yeah.
recovery. It is about building. You just don't recover as fast when you're older. You have a lot of
Hmm.
systems to manage: muscle, nervous,
Hmm.
endocrine. Like there's so many systems that can go awry with amount of time. Stack injuries to that, stack like if your style of fighting's a more aggressive fighter, you need to have that gas tank, and that goes down as you age, right? So there's so
Hmm.
many factors that play into this that it's really hard to say if anything's athletic. Like
Hmm.
if someone was to look at me when I was 15 and my motor was super high because my central nervous system could go high, they'd be like, that guy's athletic. But
Hmm.
my biomechanics were probably crap, right? So
Hmm.
was there way more I could have put on and way less on the nervous system end of it? Absolutely. And I would have
Hmm.
maybe been less athletic, but I would have had a longer athletic career, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of factors that go into this. It's not just you're aging and you're dying off. It's, are
Yeah.
you aging correctly in your recovery and your and how hard you're going. I find a lot of people in their 20s, a lot of fighters have that mentality. They're constantly fighting. It's almost like the
Yeah.
David Goggins, go, go, go. You can overcome anything. I think
Hmm.
that's a mistake for people in their 20s. If they handle their
Yeah.
bodies more like people do in their 30s, it would be a
Hmm.
different game when they get to their 30s, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Avoiding the injuries, avoiding the setbacks as much as possible. So that way you're in the training room and you're consistently working, right? That consistently over time. If you're not dealing with these spikes that bring you down and then you have to climb back up, and then again, if you can kind of undulate ever so subtly, you're going to be in the long term
Mm.
having a longer span of high-end athleticism with respect to what you're doing versus having this injury that takes you out of the game for a little bit and then you come back in. But I also have seen studies where I've seen people take significant breaks and then come back, and all of a sudden, their metrics shoot up because of their nervous system taking a break. So there is, I guess you could say, a counterpoint to it, but I can tell you anecdotally from my experience, every injury has always ever set me back. I come back and have to gain my balance again,
Yeah.
um, or gain my conditioning again, or the confidence to throw a punch. Because if I had injured my shoulder, now I don't feel so good throwing so hard anymore. Because now I feel like if I do it, man, if I go wrong, and I'm going to be dealing with it for 2 or 3 weeks. Well, I guess I got to learn how to fight in a different stance now, which literally happened. I've dislocated my shoulder and I had to learn how to fight in a different stance because throwing power punches out of one stance was just too painful for me. Um, so yeah, yeah.
anything to add to that one, Anthony?
Well, I mean, I agree. Like that was one thing that really kind of hit me with dealing with a lot of injuries was this idea that, like, man, I feel like I'm rocketing ahead when I'm trying to make fast progress sometimes, and maybe once in a blue moon I would get away with it, but
Mhm.
that fast result always gave me this false sense of confidence to keep doing that, and then I would injure
Yeah.
myself and end up, it
Mhm.
was like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back every time,
Yeah.
and I could still jump back to that 3 steps, but it would take me like you're almost always better off. um I heard it someone putting it, progressing as slow as possible, right? Where it's like we all
Mhm.
want fast results. We want to get the results yesterday, but allowing
Mhm.
yourself time to adapt and integrate. And for fascial adaptations and tendinal ligament adaptations, that can take up to like 6 to 8 months in some cases,
Yeah.
right? So this idea of allowing it to be as slow as possible. You can have quick gains on certain things. Nervous system adaptations can be like really, really quick gains. That's totally fine. You can learn new patterns. You can get really proficient at them. You can make them unconsciously competent and like find things that you're good at making quick gains for. So you have that gratification. I think all human beings need some sort of gratification and sense of progress that's tangible that we can really hold on to. But that's one thing that I really, even with the weightlifting perspective where I was very, very into it, I like my best gains were actually where I was lifting sub max and I would hit just slightly above my threshold, and then I would go back down, and then I would come up, hit just slightly above that new threshold. And I was progressing really, really slow. But that being said, like by the end of the year, my lifts were up 40, 50 pounds, right? And I didn't injure myself that entire year, right? And so I don't know at what point that philosophy got away from me. I wanted to get jacked faster, I wanted to get stronger faster, but I started driving myself into the ground more, right? And that was something that I really wish that I had learned, or that I had integrated more, I guess, when I was younger, was this idea of like progress as slow as possible and let all your tissues adapt. Find your small wins in terms of the nervous system adaptations, the things that make you feel stronger faster, feel better faster, lift the weight faster, whatever it happens to be. But consistency over time, if you're really passionate about something, you don't really care. You're in there to do it anyway. You're not in there to get the next cookie. You're in there to do it because you enjoy it, right? That was
love the
that's been
process.
the biggest yeah, exactly. The biggest paradigm shift for me in the last couple of years has been that.
Yeah, I heard someone say I forgot which, it was on Instagram Reels, it popped up, and I had to share it to my story, but this guy was like, the man who loves to walk will walk further than the guy going to a particular destination. And I was like, that's beautiful, right? That's what I try to teach when it comes to fitness, right? It's like, I don't want you to walk from point A to point B. I want you to like walking, because then you'll go to B, C, D, all the way to Z. And then to speak on a little bit we were talking about before with the age and stuff. Are you guys familiar with Mike Israetel?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember early when he was doing the JTS, he was talking about minimal volume necessary, or I don't remember the exact phrasing, but doing just enough to trigger a response, and then your overall work volume over a long period of time, you'll start to see a bigger amount of growth versus hitting that top end as often as possible, which makes sense. You don't want to, at least from what I've studied and my experience, train more than your capacity to recover, because then you're going to be you're going in reverse, right? You're not really gaining. You'll go here, but then you'll go down. Then eventually the straw will break the camel's back, and you can't gain anymore, or you're going to be going down for a longer period of time.
Yeah, that was always like, I was really influenced by Christian Thibodeau as a Quebecois strength coach and bodybuilding coach and Olympic lifting coach, everything coach. But that was always his thing. It's like the best way to train is to train as much as you can without exceeding your capacity to recover. It's like,
yes,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. But but the same token, it's like you need to have a really deep self-awareness. Like there's almost, it's more of an art than a science. Like the amount of variables in terms of what goes into recovery. There were little trick, like in lifting, there were tricks that were pretty easy. Like if I felt my grip strength going when I picked up a bar, it was like, oh, my grip is tired, my nervous system's tired, I'm going to dial it back, right? I'm going to do some speed stuff. And like I would always know when I pushed myself too far, because I had little tells. And in movement, I'm finding it's almost harder for me to find that capacity to recover thing, because like when running, for example, my calves will be really, really sore after a longer run, and maybe my feet will really, really be sore. But I actually find it's better when I go out for like a short run the next day, as opposed to like rest it. And I can roll it a little bit. So I'm finding it harder to find where is that threshold in terms of movement. I feel sometimes like, when practicing things like rope flow, I'll go and like I just fuck everything up over and over and over again. It's like, okay, my nervous system is not on my side today. I'm gonna take some time. But then you get that phenomenon where you take a few days off, and then all of a sudden it's just there. Like, like you're it's whatever your subconscious is doing, that's like piecing all that stuff together. You take that time off and it's just there. Do you guys have any tells for when you're like close to your capacity to recover and you need to pull back the volume or intensity a bit?
Yeah, well, mine is really when I start messing things up. Like yesterday, I was running down the local mountain here, and I was doing 360s and just feeling how to spin fast and things like that. I felt like uncoordinated for a couple. I'm like, you know what? That's it, right? I know the signs now, and And really the difference, before I used to think of, competing combat sports, like I'm competing in an external variable, even CrossFit, where I'm trying to lift a certain amount, where to me, martial arts is conquering more internal now. It's like, can I realize these things are happening? Can I do the same maneuver with the same power, but I'm breathing more effectively? I'm bringing more of Brian Mirabella's work into my own, where I'm trying to only breathe nostril, like do nasal breathing as I'm doing my activities. I may have to bring it back a little bit. It may be under my quote unquote threshold, but I'm building back up to what I would consider a better base, right? So that was kind of an aside on that, but that's where I'm at with it.
I've been doing similar stuff. I'll put like a mouth tape and focus on whatever cardio anything that I do normally. I think of it as a progression. So now I don't have the luxury of breathing through my mouth. Now I'm going to try to get through this whole rope flow workout or this inertia wave set while keeping the mouth tape on. Yeah, and I was going to touch on something else, but I lost my trail of thought.
Well, this is an interesting idea of like, do you have to have like a really hard stimulus all the time in order to adapt to training? And I saw I think there was like a bit of a Twitter debate. Someone had tweeted about zone 2 cardio not being as effective for building aerobic capacity as people say. It's like, the Maffetone method got really popular, where you're basically nasal breathing to build. And someone was like, I don't think it's that, you need zone 3, 4, and even some 5 to really build good cardio. And, someone pointed out, it's like, well, it's, like doing this submaximum stuff is just so that you can kind of like slowly but surely push the boundary of what your easy is. So the point is not to like just always have easy stuff. It's to kind of be on that edge just over what's easy, so that can be even easier. And then you keep pushing that edge slowly over and over. Like even like, again, the powerlifting principle that I used to apply to was I would always go sub max, and my training max was always 90% of what my 1 rep max. And I seldom exceeded that, unless, and it was just that I would lift these submaximal weights until my 80% felt like my 60 or 70%. And then I would increase the weights. And it was this idea that like I would master something that was just a little bit harder than easy. And then once it was easy, then I would keep doing that over and over again. I think the same thing with cardio, same thing with movement pattern training has been my experience, is like, I'll sequence things into easier steps. And then when those easier steps are like really ingrained, that's when I go for the hard sequencing of them. In general, I find this, and again, it's this idea of slower consistency, dialing back your intensity a little bit until the slightly uncomfortable stuff is actually very easy for you to do. And then you push your boundaries, and then you push your boundaries. I don't think like that. The David Goggins thing drives me nuts, to be honest, because this idea that you have to go hard intensity all the fucking time. It's like, actually, like, I feel like you're going to hurt yourself. I mean, David Goggins is hurt all the time. He has injuries all the time. Like he's busted himself up tons. So he's not exactly a good role model for longevity of intensity. Even right now, as my buddy wants me to run a 50K, and I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to run really, really slow, but a lot, like I'm going to run really, really slow until my really, really slow gradually gets faster and faster. I'm going to run, just long enough that it's really uncomfortable until that gets a little bit longer and a little bit longer. Right. Like, and so I like this idea of, having your threshold not be like the maximum intensity that you can try to drive yourself into the ground with. It's just seeing if you can make slightly harder as easy as now.
Yeah, incremental growth, right? Which is, especially when you're younger, you don't want increments. You want big now. And
You want
also,
leaps.
you want leaps, and then, when you think about the professional athlete, they only have a particular window. So it's hard to sell them on the idea of, well, your window will be bigger if you ease up, right? They might do something with you. I've had this happen to me a bunch of times where they're like, oh, this makes perfect sense. Then I'm going to do this thing because it's going to help me get somewhere really, really fast. And then those injuries come really, really fast. So yeah, yeah. Oh, I remember that thought from before, how I understand when I need to dial things back, when I get frustrated, when I'm messing up something and I'm like in my head, I'm thinking, I'm gonna master this. So I'm gonna do it 1 inch at a time and I'm gonna force myself to get good at it. When I'm having that conversation in my head where I'm like, I'm gonna do this no matter what, I'm like, you know what, now I need to stop. Because now I'm missing the forest for the trees, right? So I gotta ease up, do something completely different so that way my mind is out of it. And then when I come back, I'm like, well, see, this is much easier now because I'm not, my brain isn't burnt out.
Well, with the what I was mentioning, you know, if I'm doing complex movement and I start messing it up, I'm like, okay, it's fine. I'm just going to do something less complex, you know, like something on a
Mhm,
different tier that's slightly under that.
mhm.
Um, you know, instead of,
Deload.
yeah, exactly. My deloading,
Right.
instead of doing fast spins, was just
Mhm,
shuffling to the side and doing a pivot, right?
mhm,
And trying to
mhm.
get the coordination to do that smoothly. And I'm doing it, you know, down a mountain, so it's a little bit harder than normal. But I'm trying to
Mhm,
make it efficient and I'm trying to breathe through it. And that to me
mhm.
is like my 1 rep max, but just brought down a little bit lower.
Mm.
Yeah,
So it's interesting.
yeah,
This is a new paradigm in kind of training. I don't think that even for science, it's very hard for them to go, how do you measure an internal variable? You ask somebody, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, where are
yeah.
you at? But you can't really measure the internals. So you always have to measure the externals. And, you know, that's like blood markers, oxygen uptake, force production. Those are the things that are maximized and the things that are brought to the surface. And this is what you should be training here because we have the measurables. But it
Mhm,
really is the immeasurables, the internal, the breathing, the relaxation that I think a lot of
mhm.
athletes can actually gain from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Relaxation is a good one.
I think there are probably ways to quantify that so that you can be efficient in tracking progress. Because again, like
Mhm,
in terms of having the psychological, tangible results in front of you, I think psychologically is beneficial, right? Like, and
mhm,
for me, I always loved the feeling state of having a weight feel easier or having a movement feel smoother or having, the
mhm,
run just be like, oh wow, I'm like breathing really light and I'm running faster than I was last week. This is sick. Like this feels really good. Those are
mhm,
like really obvious, but I think that the higher you get to your sort of athletic threshold or the slower progress starts to be, having those little quantifiable variables, even if they're just simple, right? Like again, it's the easy win thing. You can kind of have a macro internal cueing for your progress over time, but I think in general, quantification encourages progress because again it kind of gives you a
mhm,
very clear honest things like VO2 max and like the weight on a bar and stuff. Some of that can be way overly simplistic and it can be a
mhm,
forest for the tree situation, right? But
mhm,
having something that's quantified, like fuck, even having videotaping yourself every day doing like a certain movement sequence and then watching the tangible differences in movement fluidity, that's something that can be tangibly quantifiable, right? As opposed to
mhm,
an internal feeling cue, right? Just having some sort of psychological, yes, you are progressing. And I come from that, from the progress that I used to try to help people see in fat loss coaching, where it's like the best case scenario is they make healthy changes to their diet, and over time they experience a lot of fat loss. Usually what I
mhm,
would do is I would try to give them an easy win where it was either, like most people are looking at a number on the scale, right? So it would be like, all right, here's some water weight that psychologically will boost you up. Then we're going to add the
mhm,
foods back in as you're already losing weight, so you're not going to gain that water weight back too fast, kind of thing. So now psychologically you have an early win that's going to motivate you to keep going, but it's this tangible first win that encourages obviously for people who are in love with the thing that they're doing. Again, there's the intrinsic motivation, but I think motivation in general for like progress and motivation for me have always been very intrinsically linked.
yeah, 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 yeah. And that's why I call my business the handcraft because
Mhm.
the individual that I'm working with, you are going to I focus on movement patterns, But at the end of the day, your frame and your internal cueing are what's going to keep you consistently doing things, because you want to change a behavior, not just a particular, not reach this goal, right? Love the journey, not the destination. And you are the only one who's going to be able to do that for you, unless you want to keep paying me a lot of money for the rest of your life to coach you, right? You have to handcraft the approach that fits for you, that is healthy for you, that is enjoyable for you for the rest of your life. And I just try to give you those tools to become more aware and to become more self-sufficient. And that, to me, that is what I found to be the most fulfilling when it comes to training, being able to feel the difference in what I'm doing. And of course, those tangible results. A couple of weeks ago, I went to this bowling alley nearby, and they have this punch thing, right, where you get to monitor your punch power. And I can see my punch power going up. And I'm like, oh, I'm up there. I punch as hard as Anthony Joshua now. I feel really good about it. You know, those numbers, like, I'm just sticking in my head, like, yes, I hit as hard as him now. That's awesome. There's people that punch harder, obviously, but just having those numbers and that comparison gave me motivation. Like, all right, well, maybe I could try to punch harder than him now. Let's see. At the same time, looking back at the way I used to fight, or looking at my old movements, and seeing how I'm moving now, like before and after, whether it be Goda, whether it be punching or kicking, whatever it is, and seeing the changes, especially the changes that I'm not thinking about, is really what's like, oh yes, it's another fulfilling thing. As well as, oh, I feel much smoother, or I'm way heavier, but I'm way more flexible than I ever been. And those things are key in helping long-term success.
Couldn't agree more with that. I'm just thinking back my movement probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And this was just after I finished CrossFit. Maybe it was 5 years ago. I wouldn't feel like shadow boxing. I wouldn't feel like throwing punches. It felt labored to me. But now I want to shadow box at any point I can, because it feels amazing. I can outlet energy. It feels snappy. It's like something I can do that changes my state right away. How do I quantify that? It's very, very difficult to do, right? And the actual psychological state it changes, that's not quantifiable. That's kind of what I meant by the internal, external variables. Yeah, it's also interesting, right? Like,
it's really interesting. I used to be embarrassed to shadow box. I used to not want people to see me, because I was like, I don't look like I know I'm shadow boxing. And nowadays I kind of do it like just without even thinking, and then somebody will come up to me and be like, are you gonna fight somebody? What are you doing? I'm like, it's just what it is. I love the rhythm, I love the flow, I love the feeling of it, where before I would kind of be secretive about it and go somewhere and be like, this has to look like I know what I'm doing, in case there's someone there that's like, actually, you're doing that mechanically wrong. That's not how a punch looks. Now I don't really normally care, as long as it's flowy and I'm moving. And I find it really meditative, because I'm not thinking about anything else anymore. Now I'm thinking of the flow, and I'm thinking, oh, this guy is going to come up to me. I'm going to do this, that, and the third thing. And like you said, that's hard to quantify that. You know, my enjoyment has increased, so I quantify that as improvement.
It's funny. I like to put those on my stories where, caught in the act shadow boxing. Like somebody's looking around and then they all of a sudden start shadow boxing, and then somebody walks by and they stop.
It's on like a security camera at like a little convenience store or something. The guy's just like going at it. I was doing like the David Weck core fist thing back and forth in public, and my partner looks at me. She's like, "Stop! You look like you're gonna fucking fight someone." Like, what are you doing right now?
Just fidgeting.
Like angry, like you want to like start something with someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. You ever seen that meme of like?
No, go ahead. What's
you ever seen that meme of a guy? He's like at a party, and it's like, they don't know, insert words, right?
Yeah.
And there was one that like I was laughing because it was like, they don't know I got hands, and then you see like a combination of move, and it's like, I'll have a couple drinks in me. I'm like, I could kick that guy's ass. Just let him know real quick I can move.
That's hilarious.
That's really funny. Well, guys, we got to wrap this episode up. Unfortunately, I got to jump back to work, but thank you so much for hopping on with us again, Rudy. This was a super, super fun conversation. We'll have to have you back on for another episode super soon. We're doing our June lineup pretty soon here. Can't believe the month of May has already flown by. If you are listening on Spotify or iTunes, please subscribe, leave us a little rating and review. We really appreciate it. It really helps us out. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you want to hear about next. Let us know what you agreed with, what you didn't agree with. You can follow me at the Body Moves. You can follow Will at the Art of Move. You can follow Rudy at the Handcraft _ all on Instagram. Those are some fun places to see us and our content. And we'll catch you next time for another episode of the Art of Move podcast.
Have a good one, guys.